How are you? My name's Ayan. It's absolutely great to be here at Rail Wellbeing Live. It's the second time I've done this. I did this in 2023, and I'm great. I'm just in such a great place in terms of being back here. It's a real honour, and what an event it is. I've seen the lineup of speakers, and I know you're in for an amazing few days. So what I'm all about is really what I call saving lives in slow motion, which isn't the title of the talk, but it's the title of my podcast. And this talk is about small hacks and big results, which promises quite a lot. And a lot of you might be thinking, oh, I'm just going to give you loads of hacks to do and you're going to go away and feel better. And there is an element of that in this talk, but I want to sort of lay a bit of groundwork beforehand, because just giving you hacks without putting it into any context isn't really that helpful. So I'm going to give you a little bit about my story, tell you a bit about my journey, and also how that relates to your journey, because in my job as a GP, I listen to stories all day, pretty much, whether that's something like an acute illness, whether it's mental health, whether it's cancer, whether it's someone's bereavement. It doesn't matter. People bring everything to the door of a GP, and you all have your own individual stories, as do I. And what I've learned really over the last 25 years of listening to stories is that people are complicated, and we are really a walking kind of system, if you like, an operating system that has lots of inputs in terms of what creates health and can also make us feel ill. And I guess the first thing I want to do is really just acknowledge that every single person is different and everyone's story is different. And what I want you to leave with by the end of this session is something useful that you can take away for you, that is going to work in your everyday life. And for me, it's got, these sort of hacks, if you like, have got to do two things. One is they've got to try and make you feel better in the short term, but also improve your health and longevity, whatever that means to you, in the longer term. I think also health and well-being is in a difficult place at the moment. We live in a culture of overwhelm. There's so much noise and information out there. You just got to look at things like TikTok and all the sort of things that people promise, and a lot of them are by people who don't work in healthcare. And the first thing I want to acknowledge is that health and medicine are not the same thing. So although I'm a medical doctor, I certainly do not know everything about well-being, and there are lots of people who are not doctors that know a lot about well-being. It's just knowing who to trust and what you should listen to and what you shouldn't. And I think that's part of the problem in modern society. There are so many influences, but we'll come back to that a bit later on. So I'm going to start with my own story. The reason I call my podcast Saving Lives in Slow Motion is that's what I think that a good practitioner should be doing. It's not really about quick fixes. We sort of go through life in a way with things happening to us. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own story. So I was actually very healthy until about 11 years ago. And suddenly overnight, I just couldn't function. I couldn't sort of digest my food properly. My joints ached all the time. I was getting brain fog. My memory had gone to pieces, and I was sort of functioning like someone who was in their 80s. And I couldn't quite piece together what had happened to me. I was thinking, hang on, what's going on here? And it took me about 6 months to fix my health. And the answer wasn't really in medical interventions. It was all about looking at my lifestyle, the things that were happening to me and my habits and what I was doing. And lifestyle medicine, which is in the title of my talk, what is that? Well, one of the things that needs acknowledging is that in the middle of last century, what happened in medicine was that there was a lot of advancements in acute care. So hospitals historically in ancient times were places that people would go to actually spend the end of their life or die. And in the middle of last century, suddenly lots of advancements in things like, antibiotic therapy and medication meant that people were living longer. They were going into hospital, spending a period of time there and coming out well. And lifestyle became this kind of world of blame. It was the patient's responsibility about, smoking and alcohol, and it was sort of maligned, really. But it's come full circle. So there's a lot of ancient wisdom. If you look at sort of traditional medical cultures and you look at ancient practices, there's a lot of ancient wisdom that we now think is part of normal well-being: sleep, stress, diet, exercise. It's all kind of common sense. But later on, I'm going to sort of show you how you can sort of tailor that to yourself. I think most of us know that we should be doing these things. It's just doing it and working out how to do it. So going back to my story, so I'm going to show you in my next slide a framework that is in my book called The Health Fix. I don't want this to sound like a PR exercise for my book and my podcast, by the way, but this is genuinely my story, and I had to sort of get it down and put it into words in order to help other people help themselves. So the center of my book really is this. I want you to just have a look at this slide and think about your own life and think about yourself and all of the things that are listed in this kind of figure of eight loop. And in the middle of this loop is any symptom that you don't catch from anyone else or any condition. So it could be feeling tired all the time. It could be getting bloating after meals. It could be type 2 diabetes. It could be headaches. It could be joint pains. And in terms of our lifestyle, the things that govern that symptom or how you're feeling at any one moment in time, even today, this morning, for example, is a mixture of all of these things. So, just I'm not going to go through them all in complete detail, but just to illustrate the point, sleep is a really interesting one. So if I'm sure that if you don't sleep very well, you're more grouchy the next day. You're more likely to make bad decisions in terms of what you're eating and drinking, or how you interact with your colleagues at work. Exercise we know about, but it's not just exercise. It's more about what exercise is right for you. And diet, again, we know about not eating ultra processed foods and all of that stuff. But when it comes to you and your diet, I'm going to come on to something called how, what, and when. It's all about how you eat, what you eat, and when you eat, not just eat more healthily. And this loop is really important. And if you stare at it just for a second and think about, your own life, things might sort of pop out. You might think, hang on, I'm not getting quite enough exercise. My stress levels are high. And when I think of my own health loop back at the time, what was happening was nothing was working. I wasn't getting good sleep. I was just in a state of system malfunction. And by that, I mean my biological systems were malfunctioning because of something that had happened to me. So, my gut, my brain, my cardiovascular system, nothing was working. I was feeling anxious. I was feeling tired. As I said to you before, my gut wasn't working. So how does this relate to how I was feeling? Well, the first thing I did was I looked at my own story. And I'm going to start bottom left with infections. What have infections got to do with how you feel right now? Well, if you have any historic infections from years gone by, so say you're someone who's had lots of courses of antibiotics over many years, because antibiotics can't tell the difference between good and bad bugs, they wipe out all of the healthy bugs in your gut, which is the food for your immune system, and that can create fatigue or gut symptoms like bloating. And I hadn't had lots of antibiotics, but I did have something called dengue fever many years ago, which I'd recovered from. But these kind of historic infections put a stamp on your immune system. It's often the case with people who have long COVID as well. It's not the COVID that gives them the fatigue. It's actually other viruses that they've picked up over the years that are reawakened once they get COVID. So for me, that was definitely one thing. Environment, another really important one. I always say, you can have the cleanest diet in the world and run across the South Downs every day. But if your environment isn't good, if you've got a bully for a boss, for example, if you've got a toxic relationship at home, you are not going to have good health. And at the time, I had there was stuff going on at work, so my stress levels were off the scale, and my work environment wasn't great at the time for various reasons. So there were three things in my health loop that needed addressing immediately, and the others weren't too bad. But so I knew that my answer lay in there somewhere, And then the next thing that I thought was, hang on, so what am I doing every day that I can change? And that brings me on to this. So if you've looked at that last slide and you've had a bit of a think about your own life, the way to kind of implement this is by really understanding your typical day. So I do this a lot in the consulting room. So when people come in and they dump loads of symptoms on me, which is more and more the case these days because of the way medicine has changed, um, I used to get quite frustrated thinking, hang on, I haven't really got a handle on this. Sorry, you're getting palpitations, you've got headaches, you can't digest your food, your partner thinks you're depressed. That's quite a lot to deal with in like 10 or 15 minutes. I now say to them, tell me about your typical day. It's a really, really powerful question. And if you actually think about your own day and what you do from the minute you wake up to the minute that you go to sleep, I think you'll surprise yourself, because most of us are not consciously aware about what we're doing. So, for example, when you wake up, something that's very interesting is that the first part of your brain that wakes up in the morning is called our amygdala. It's also the part of the brain that processes fear and worries. And so if you're someone who wakes up worrying in the morning, that is a very normal physiological sort of response. It doesn't mean necessarily that you're depressed or anxious, and you have to wait a little bit for the other parts of your brain to wake up. So this is something I've become much more aware of. And so I don't worry about worrying anymore because I think, oh, hang on, naturally things come into your mind about what you've got set up for the day. Also, other things like habits, things like how many cups of coffee you drink. These are all important inputs into our systems. And one of the things I'd love to get across to you is that wherever your health is at right now, if you're feeling well, great, good for you. Hopefully that will go on for many years to come. If you've got any niggling symptoms or you're not feeling great, if you're tired all the time, or if you're feeling a bit anxious, or maybe you get bloating after meals, whatever it is, those kind of things that mean that your health it's okay, but it's not great. Doing this exercise will really help you. So it's almost like keeping a diary of your day. And if you write it out, or you tell a friend or a family member, often things will jump out at you. So one of the examples that really sticks in my mind actually is someone that came to see me a few years ago. I'm just going to go back to this slide. So this was a chap who his blood sugar markers in his bloods, his HbA1c, which is a blood test we do for type 2 diabetes, was raised. Now, he was already on a low carbohydrate diet and he exercised a lot, which are the two things you would think, I'm sure, as a fairly well-educated audience, work really well to control blood sugar. So his diet and exercise, you could say, were a sort of a 10 out of 10. And my question to him was, tell me about your typical day. And it was astonishing. So he worked in a really, really demanding job in media. His sleep cycle was up the creek because he worked funny shifts. And he had a really toxic environment. So his stress levels were off the scale. And what I realized was that his stress and his sleep were so bad that was enough in this case to increase this gentleman's blood sugar. And I said, look, and also you're doing the wrong kind of exercise. He was a really high stress character and he was doing a lot of aerobic exercise. I said, look, how about changing the type of exercise that you do? Something slightly slower, something like yoga. And also, can you do anything about the fact that you're effectively getting bullied at work? Anyway, long story short, he went away, had a think about it. And then I didn't see him for about 2 years, by which time he'd repeated his bloods and his blood sugar had gone back to normal because he'd changed job. I'm not saying we can all do that, obviously. So his stress levels had gone right down and he was sleeping a lot better. So this is sort of a really good example of why your typical day will give you clues for you to become your own kind of health detective, if you like. And this all sounds fairly sort of logical, but we just don't do it. Um, going back to the health loop, I'm jumping backwards and forwards a little bit. Sunlight, I just want to go through these a little bit, is a euphemism for vitamin D. So nice guidance these days pretty much recommends that every group, whatever age or ethnicity you are, supplements with vitamin D in winter months. And later on, I'm going to tell you my own kind of routine at the end. So, and one of the things I did this morning was take my vitamin D supplement. It's very important, but sunlight's a bit of a euphemism. The other thing about sunlight that's really important, Professor Russell Foster, who's an expert on circadian rhythm, many of you will have heard this about circadian rhythm. This is our sort of body clock, if you like. So exposure to morning light, you'll hear lots of people talk about this in their books and on their podcasts. Why is it so important? The reason it's so important is that even if I were blind, every single cell in your body responds to natural light. And that helps set your body clock. So rule number one for sleep and how it links to things like light is get to bed at the same time every night and get up at the same time every morning as much as you can. Obviously, at weekends and things, it goes off kilter. But if you're someone who's struggling with your body clock, it's not always possible because I know many of you do shift work. But when you're sort of off or when you're not working shifts, that's a great rule of thumb. And getting out in morning light, very difficult at this time of year, obviously, and it's only just beginning to brighten up outside. So that's what the sunlight kind of element of this health loop is. Stress, we know, is bad for us. It's often invisible. It really is something that constantly needs managing. One of the other things you've got to remember, we live at the moment in fairly toxic times. And the planet and the state that it's in doesn't really help in terms of stress levels. It's hard to get away from bad news, but I'll talk a bit about that later in terms of what you can do as a hack. Genetics is important. Now, this is something that bears thinking about. If you have a family history of something, it's really worth thinking about how you can mitigate it. Many of you will have seen documentaries on Netflix, about people who have, genetic predisposition to Alzheimer's disease, for example. It doesn't mean that it's a write-off, because all of what I'm trying to get across is that, yes, you may have a genetic predisposition to diabetes or Alzheimer's. It doesn't mean you're definitely going to develop that condition, depending on your other habits. And this is another useful thing to think about. And I would recommend, next time you kind of take a look at your health, or next time you're visiting your healthcare practitioner, is if you've got any strong family history of something, then it's worth bringing up and thinking about. So we covered infections. Sleep we know about. Environment, I've just explained, is a bit of a dumping ground for everything else, in terms of what's going on in your life and whether it's a healthy environment or not in the broadest sense of the word. Sunlight, we talked about. Stress. Diet and exercise, the cornerstone of good health, as everyone knows. And I'm not going to talk too much about that because I know you've got other speakers who know a lot more about in depth about nutrition and physical exercise, but they're both good for you, obviously. Okay, so that was your typical day. Now, what if you've done this exercise and you think, well, hang on, that's really good because I've realised I'm getting to bed too late. Let's just make one change, and often that one change has myriad benefits on other things in your life. So I'll give you an example. If you go to bed a bit earlier and you wake up the next day feeling more refreshed, you're probably less likely to get into an argument with your colleagues. You're probably more likely to make sensible food choices, and you're not likely to feel as tired at the end of the next day. And that means that your whole system is working much better. And I can't emphasize enough how, as a biological system, in terms of our gut, our brain, our heart, our skeletal system, those things are all intercommunicating. And what we do and what happens to us in our life affects those. So a really extreme example of this is, I've done this many times, as a student, is if you stay up late all night revising for an exam and you're drinking 10 coffees, and you go in for the exam having had no sleep at 8 o'clock in the morning, if you imagine what's happening to your heart rate and your gut, which is, you know, not feeling good, and your nervous system, that sort of, it's a really extreme example, obviously, because you're not feeling good and your brain is foggy and you're wired. But what happens in slow motion to us over many, many years is those systems start to slowly malfunction unless you pay some attention to this health loop and you revisit it. You can revisit it once a month, once every 2 months. It's a good thing to take stock. I constantly have to do it. I'm not, a paragon of health. I'm intrinsically actually someone who would love to just, sometimes just veg out and watch Top Gun on on my TV or whatever, which is fine now and again. So, we've all got to constantly slightly make an effort to work at these things. What if you've done this and you get stuck? Now, there are two things I really want to reinforce. And again, I talk about them in my book. And these can pay massive dividends. There's one concept is called too much versus too little. Are you getting too much of something that is making you feel ill or unwell, or too little of something? I'm going to start with that one, and then I'm going to come on to this thing called monkey brain. So a really simple one for this, say you've got migraine headaches and you look at your health loop and you think about your typical day. And you realize when you write it down or you think about it that you're drinking 4 cups of coffee a day and no water, and you're not taking a vitamin D supplement in winter, and winter is when your migraines get worse. So you might be getting too little vitamin D and having too much coffee. And when you sort of up the vitamin D and reduce the coffee, you get this kind of double lever effect, and often a symptom will get much better. It works for many, many things. Skin is another good example. Not putting on enough moisturizer, and sort of, or perhaps not getting enough omega-3 fatty acids in your diet. That's the other supplement I take, by the way, an omega-3 supplement. I can bore you with that later in the questions if you want. But so that's a really good rule of thumb as just one thing to look at. It works on so many levels. Too much alcohol, not enough water, too much exercise sometimes, as in the case that I described earlier on. He was getting the wrong kind of exercise, but because he's a high stress character. Really, really useful tool. The best story I have about this, and some of you will have heard this, but I've got to talk about it. It was someone who used to work in the railways, actually, from many years ago, a chap with intractable headaches, and I had sent him to the local hospital, to the neurologist. He'd been started on all these fancy drugs that are normally used for epilepsy, for migraine treatments. And after many months, he was off work. He couldn't work, and he was in my consulting room in tears, saying, "Look, I'm getting married soon. I just don't know what I'm going to do. I can't go on like this. I still can't work because these headaches are absolutely killing me." And what I remember about him was that he was a really, really, physically fit chap with, defined muscles. And I said to him, "Look, I'm really sorry. I've let you down. I don't know. We've tried everything." And I said, "But you're obviously still, going to the gym." And he said to me, "No, this isn't the gym. This is 6 cans of tuna a day." And I said, it was like a record scratch moment. And I thought, wait a minute, 6 cans of tuna a day. I don't think I've ever met anyone who eats that much tuna. And I said, just as a punt, because I wasn't practicing like this then. This was like over 20 years ago. I said, "Do you mind just swapping that out for chicken? Are you just having that because it's protein?" And he goes, "Yeah." Anyway, long story short, he did that, and 6 weeks later, no headaches. He bought me a big bottle of bubbly to say thank you. And that was the moment where I thought, gosh, all these like clever neurologists, no one sort of asked him about what he eats. We obviously there are certain foods and drinks that trigger migraines. Even the weather can trigger migraines. But that was a lesson to me, and that's how I sort of started formulating this idea of too much versus too little. Those of you that really love hacking health, I know a lot of people, love doing blood tests and looking for levels of minerals and things. Not necessarily essential, to be honest. It's more about your habits and thinking about what you're doing each day. So that's too much versus too little. The second thing that I want you to be aware of is something called monkey brain. So monkey brain is really your, like the chimp paradox, which many of you will have read. It's your inner monkey. It's what toddlers and teenagers do. They have no control in what they do. They just see what's in front of them and they want it, like us seeing a donut. And I did a talk for the police a few years ago, and they work in a very demanding environment, like a lot of yourselves, whatever your role is. And one guy said, what is it, look, when I'm on the motorway and I see that KFC sign, I just think, I've got to have one. How do I stop that? I don't want to make a salad and take it with me on the road. And that is, your monkey brain basically lighting up. Your dopamine pathways are going, and you think, oh, I really fancy that. And the way to control that is just be aware that that's what it is. If you're aware that it's not you, but it's your inner monkey, you're much more able to think, hang on, I know what's going on here. I've been hijacked by my inner monkey. I get this all the time. And it stops you, if you're aware of it, making bad decisions, and if you don't make the bad decision, you feel really good about yourself afterwards. Okay. The other element of being able to, implement all of these things, it's all well and good me telling you these things, but is behavior change. And in real life, there are only a few reasons why people change their behaviors. I'm just going to run through those very quickly. So there's loads of books on behavior change. They're great. Everyone's come across Atomic Habits, I'm sure, by James Clear. Brilliant book. But the reality is you change your behaviors for one of 6 reasons. One is what I call a happy accident, where something happens by mistake and you suddenly feel better. So you forget to buy coffee and you don't drink it for a week and suddenly you feel a lot better. And that's it, you've given up coffee. Or the same with booze and fags and things. That is just something that happens by accident. Another one is what I call under orders, where there are rules, like you can't smoke on an aeroplane, or you go to a country where they don't serve alcohol and suddenly you're not drinking for a month and you think, oh God, I feel a lot better. The third one is something called the unthinkable. This is where something terrible happens, like your best friend suddenly dies of a heart attack or something, and you think, right, that's it, I'm changing my behaviors. No one wants that one to happen. Another one is what I call community spirit. This is where you make change by doing things in a group with other people. Parkrun is a brilliant example of this, and I used to go a lot, and I it's a brilliant way to create behavior change. Then there's one called friendly jealousy. This is one that happens it's happened to me before, where you meet a friend that you haven't seen in years and you think, wow, you look amazingly healthy. I want some of that. And then it spurs you into action and you start, taking more exercise and looking after yourself a bit better. And the last one is what I call grasping the nettle, which is absolute sheer willpower. Very, very difficult to do. I remember my dad did it many, many years ago, where he used to smoke now and again, and he just sort of went, right, that's it, I'm never smoking again, and managed to sort of never smoke. Very difficult, and only some personality types can do it. If you are not in any of those categories, this framework is the easiest way for me to enable behavior change. And I'll give you a real life example of why I had to come up with this. So at my old practice in North London, really lovely community. Every patient would bring in some sort of food, mainly biscuits and cakes, and they would go in my drawer. I was much younger then. This is, my 30s, so I'm heading to my mid 50s now. And by the end of the day, it would all be gone, because it was there and it was delicious. And I was just feeling terrible and just sluggish, and I knew I had to do something about it. So what I did was, after a while, this is before food banks existed, I said to them, thank you so much for bringing this. Could you mind leaving it at reception for me, so that it wasn't... So I identified, this is where the eye of ideal comes in, a problem. I sort of defined it as in, I really need to stop eating this. And I engaged by actually taking some action in terms of thinking, right, I've got to actually do something here. And the activation bit is actually making sure that you've started it. And what the activate bit's also, I used a lot of replacements. I started bringing in fruit instead. And actually, after about a week, I started feeling lighter and brighter. It was amazing. It wasn't some sort of revelation. It was just something I was struggling with, because who doesn't like eating cake and biscuits? And the last bit is called look back. And this is the most important bit. So when you look, I don't think we do this enough. We don't pat ourselves on the back enough. If you look back after you've created a behavior change, you can sort of be really chuffed that you've done it. And that keeps you doing it. It sort of keeps you accountable. So this is just a really easy way. If you identify something, it might be anything, like you need to take more exercise, or you want to start running. It's a good one. It's a very common one that I hear, especially at this time of year. You've got to define it. Well, how far are you going to run? Couch to 5K, by the way, is brilliant if you've not come across that, and if someone who hasn't run before. So you have to sort of define it. Engaging means kind of also setting up your environment. Don't leave your running kit somewhere that it's going to be really onerous to go and get on. Leave it by the front door. And activate means actually doing it on the first day. And once you've done it, you pat yourself on the back. Really, really straightforward, has really helped me. I use it to this day on numerous things. As I say, we're all sort of human. Right. So now I'm going to, because I want some time for questions as well, I'm going to talk a little bit about these hacks. I'm going to go on to the next slide shortly. But all of that I've just sort of dumped on you probably makes sense, and probably think, yeah, this is quite, I think I can do this. And you may have even sparked some thoughts about things that you want to address, and how your biological systems interact with what you're doing. And to really, really hone it down, I am going to bring up the next slide, actually, but I don't want you to sort of focus on it for the time being. I want you to think of 3 things. So this is, I'm in the middle of writing another book at the moment, and I realized that there are 3 things that every single person I see in the consulting room, and myself, if you focus on these 3 things and all things are equal, you are likely to preserve good health. And the 3 things are this. I call them feel, flow, and fuel. So feel is about how you feel about yourself, your inner self. On my podcast, there's an episode on inner child work. And if any of you have done this, it's basically about temperament and kind of understanding yourself and your emotions. We don't do enough of this work in the modern world because we're always on go, go, go. We're so distracted. And on this slide, the thing that I've got here in red is probably, I know it sounds really shallow, is the essence of it. Don't take things personally. The other day I was in central London and this guy walked past round a corner, and I was with my family, and he just shouted, "Move!" Really aggressively. And I think 10 years ago I would have thought, oh my gosh, is he talking to me? Actually that's a problem with his ego. It's nothing to do with us. He's got an issue. I'm not going to take it personally. And doing some work around that is quite important, however you're going to do it. Again, you'll have other talks during this event that will touch on this sort of stuff. But inner self, how you feel is really important in the moment. Flow is about posture and how you move. It's not just about exercise. I'm going to get you to try something. I want you to try this now, actually. So I want you to look up ahead of you, like I am now, up to the ceiling. And as you'll keep your gaze there, and as you're doing that, I want you to try and think of something sad without moving your eyes down. It's quite difficult, isn't it? In fact, it's almost impossible. And the reason I'm getting you to do that is that everything works back to front. If you sat in a room staring at the floor like this for a bit, after a few minutes, you would not feel great, because someone sitting in that posture normally is feeling sad. And there are lots of things that, you can do with your posture that can set you up for the day. So one of the ones I do every day, which takes literally 10 seconds is cat cow, for which is those of you that do yoga will know this very well. And if I don't have time to do a full yoga workout, I will do just that, if nothing else. And the reason I do that is that it loosens up your back. And it's funny, I saw a friend the other day who said to me, "Have you got taller?" And I go, "No, no, I don't think so. Why?" And he goes, "Oh, because you just seem, and it's because I've been stretching more and doing more yoga. So these things, some of them just take 10 seconds. So rule number one is don't take things personally. Rule number two is think about your posture. If you're doing nothing else, cat cow definitely. And also other things like changing your energy is really, really important. So again, this is something to do with feeling things somatically. So, sometimes when you feel sad or you feel happy, a good question to ask yourself is, where are you feeling it in your body? Are you feeling it here? Are you feeling it in your head? Are you feeling it here? Because a lot of these things, if you don't acknowledge it, they create symptoms and they create tension. So we have a lot of physiotherapists that we work with at work, and a lot of the people that we send to them, actually the ailment they've got, has got a sort of an emotional reason behind it. So really sort of thinking about that mind-body connection. So that's feel is your inner self, flow is sort of posture, keeping yourself moving, changing energies, sort of like shaking things out, really, really important. And one of the other ones I've got on there is breathing techniques. Now, you will have had a lot of stuff on breathing, and lots of experts. One of my favorite ones, there are two things on this slide that go together. My 1 minute recharge. So I do this twice a day. I pull up to work, I sit in the car for a minute. And in terms of my posture, I imagine I'm like a sort of in one of those inflatables where you've let all the air out, and I literally just completely relax and almost collapse in my seat. And I sit there for an indulgent minute. I feel so relaxed by the end of it. As soon as I walk into work, I know I'm going to be hit by lots of questions and lots of problems. I'm much more able to handle them. And when I pull into the driveway at the end of a long day, I do exactly the same thing, to leave the doctor's bag at the door. It's so powerful, I can't tell you. It's 1 minute twice a day, and it will change your life. Now, if you want to sort of go a little bit further, there's a breathing technique. My favorite one is called alternate nostril breathing. It's got a name in yoga called Nadi Shodhana. And if you're doing it, you can try this now. You can do it anyway. The simplest way is just literally sort of blocking one nostril and taking a deep breath in. Or you can put two fingers here and use your thumb and ring finger to block each nostril. I'm going to just do it with me if you can. It's wonderful, honestly. And you do 5 sets. So block one nostril. Deep breath in and out. Block the other nostril. Deep breath in and out. And you do that 5 times. It's wonderful, honestly. And physiologically, it lowers your heart rate, your blood pressure, and de-stresses you. So these are little hacks that you can do every day. There's a picture of a glass of water there as well, because hydration is so, so important. The number of people that come in going, "Doctor, I'm tired all the time," and I sort of think, so am I. But actually, hydration is the answer. Often, it's not because they're deficient in B12 or vitamin D and all of those sort of things. And I really, the last one, which is fuel, is about metabolic health, and that is to do with making good choices in terms of what we eat. I'm not going to go deep into nutrition. Fiber is good, healthy fats are good, healthy protein sources are good, and slow carbohydrates like vegetables. I think most of you know that already. I'm not going to go on about it. But for me, those are the things that I do. I sort of do something to do with physical movement. It's also about little and often. Habits are also about little and often. So I've personally got some dumbbells in our bathroom, and I use them every single morning. So I don't go to a gym or anything, but I do a number of reps every day. And that's the thing about habits. You've got to do it's about fitting them in. So these all sound really sort of quick and easy because that's what works for me. I don't have an hour to sort of spare, if you like, and sometimes I do. So that's it really. So I think if you're going to take something away from this, think during your day as you're going through it, think about your typical day, think about those factors, think feel, flow, and fuel, how you're feeling in yourself. Even if someone's upset you, the trick I have is I take an extra second, I take an extra beat before I react, and I think, wait a minute, why am I feeling upset here? Is this my ego? Often it will be. I find this depending on what age demographic I'm dealing with in a consultation. I do find that often it's like that. This sense of self-importance, which isn't really what ego is, but and if that gets challenged, people feel very upset. We all have an ego, and sometimes it's worth just acknowledging whether that's what's going on. Okay, so I've talked for quite a long time. I realise we're running out of time. I want to allow time for questions. So, what have we got here? So I'm just reading them here. So I'm going to go through. So sorry, there's a load of. So here it says, I heard vitamin D should be taken with vitamin K. Is this true? What if you're not taking vitamin K? Yeah, so vitamin K2 is a cofactor, as is magnesium, to help vitamin D be absorbed. It's not completely essential, but it works a bit better. What dosage of vitamin D should we be taking? Gosh, these are really complex, tricky questions. It seems to vary. It's a really good question. So 1 in 4 people have something called a vitamin D receptor mutation. And that means that at receptor level, at their skin, they don't absorb, they're not able to manufacture vitamin D in the same way as other people. I'm sorry, apologies for my really messy study behind me, by the way. It's so that group in the consulting room, they go and have a vitamin D level that comes back low. I put them on, I don't know, 4,000 units a day or whatever it is, and they have it retested and they're still low. So that group need a lot more. So the answer is it's individual. A safe level would be about 1,000 units a day. If you have darker skin like myself, probably more, maybe 2,000 units a day. But it's a suck it and see sort of approach, really. It's different for different people. Right. How long do historical infections and antibiotics affect the immune system for? Is there anything we can do to help address this, please? Yeah, really good question. So a friend of mine, Emily Leeming, who is a gut health expert, it talks about this quite a lot. It really depends. Some people it will hardly affect. It depends on your constitution and the quality of your gut flora. And some people are born, they're blessed with good gut flora. And the old advice, very much used to be, and still to this day, I still kind of advise it, is if you've been on antibiotics recently, to replenish your gut flora quickly, you can take a probiotic. But Emily has recently come across some research that shows that isn't really that effective. The best way to replenish your gut flora is by eating prebiotic foods, things like asparagus and broccoli, fibrous foods, because they make more favorable species of your own gut flora. So, they improve your gut flora, but that can cause a bit of gas. So it depends. Sometimes it can wipe out your flora for a year in extremis, and other times, a few weeks. Right. I've got here, I'm just looking at ones that I can see. What would your top tips be to regulate a dysregulated nervous system? That's a really good question. So more and more, there's lots of research going on around the vagus nerve. Many of you will have heard of this. And our vagus nerve is sort of, an antidote to fight or flight. It's the sort of part of our parasympathetic nervous system that makes us feel relaxed. So the answer to that's a really big question, that, because all of those inputs I showed you earlier on are important for nervous system regulation. So it's not just meditation or mindfulness. There are lots of inputs. Some people find that their nervous system goes haywire depending on what they're eating and drinking, or what kind of exercise they're taking. The main way is to do things that stimulate your vagus nerve. So a really quick and easy way, actually, is if you pinch just here on your earlobe, that activates your vagus nerve. Or putting your legs up against a wall, deep breathing, alternate nostril breathing, those kind of practices, but can be quite challenging. There is also, you can also buy vagus nerve stimulators. There's lots on the market with different grades of evidence. Some of them can be quite expensive. So yeah, that kind of approach, I'd say. I often get into cycles of giving up alcohol and then binging after a couple of weeks and feeling regret. Any advice for breaking those habits? I don't have a good ability to moderate what I drink. Very, very good question, very common question, and I can relate to this, not quite in the same way, but I tend to have like a month off and then I'm back on it and I have I feel guilt about it. So I can really relate to that. It's interesting. Part of this, your inner self and getting to know yourself, is whether you are able to handle moderation. And there's a big growing movement of people who are sober curious. I'm sober curious, actually, and I do wonder, because I feel so affected by alcohol now that, as in, it doesn't agree with me, that maybe I should stop altogether. I've had a couple of friends who've completely abstained now for several years, and I've seen how much their lives have improved. And it goes back to my behavior change thing, about, that friendly jealousy. It's a tricky one. I think the other thing with any habit like that is, if you say to yourself, look, I'm in control of when I drink. I can have a drink right now if I want, but I choose not to. I'm going to drink water instead. And if you pat yourself on the back for not drinking, you can sustain it for longer. It sounds also from that story, if you're binging, that is very much that sort of monkey brain dopamine driven, you're looking for a particular buzz and perhaps trying to replace it with something else, go for a run instead of, drinking wine. Replacements are quite useful. Yeah. Okay. So I'm trying to get through how much is too much coffee. Yeah. Great question. For some people, it's just one cup will make them go completely haywire and they'll just have palpitations all day. So there are, in terms of our genetics and our DNA, there are fast and slow caffeine metabolizers. Obviously, most of us don't do DNA analyses, but you will know very quickly if you're one or the other, because you will, some people can tolerate 10 coffees a day. They can drink it before they go to bed, not affected by it. So they obviously metabolize it quickly. Other people can't drink more than one or two. Right, next one. This is a long one here. As a woman, I feel like my health loop is controlled by what week of the cycle I'm in. My mood, stress, tolerance, sleep quality, diet, ability to exercise different depending on what week is. Absolutely. I feel like this is often missed and not taken into account with so much of the advice that's out there, which makes everything more confusing and disappointing when the changes you make are not effective. Any advice for supporting hormones along the way? Yeah, really good question. So the irony, and I'm certainly no expert on hormones, is that what you're meant to do in order to help is the hardest thing to do. So in the week that runs up to you coming onto your period, what works really well is a low carbohydrate diet. But the thing that you'll tend to crave are carbohydrates. And in terms of supplements, evening primrose oil, starflower oil, those things they can help a little bit. And I'm also a fan of omega-3 supplements for most people, because they have so many myriad benefits in terms of brain, heart, joints, all sorts. It's a really, really difficult one. And I think the other thing is it's hard because we're so busy, but having some sort of support in that. So groups are really, really powerful. I'm noticing this more and more in healthcare. So in America, group medicine is very popular, where you have a sort of a shared sort of need, and just talking to other people about how difficult it is can help. But I do appreciate that. That's a really good point. It's like I said earlier on, it's so easy to sort of talk about these things, but actually doing it can be very difficult. What supplements should we all be taking as a rule of thumb? Again, again, really individual. The ones I personally think should be for everyone. Really, vitamin D is the only one that I really think is essential because of where we live in this part of the world. Omega-3, I wouldn't say is essential, but it seems for lots of people to be of benefit. And the rest, if you've got a really, unfortunately, food's not as nutritious now as it was in the 1960s, and so if you've got a good whole food diet, you'll probably be okay. There are certain specific genetic conditions and other, if you've got a family history of B12 deficiency, for example, then that needs addressing. But again, it's very individual. The main one for me is vitamin D. It's a bit of a joke where I live amongst our community that I'm the vitamin D doctor. When I first came, I'd moved from a practice in North London where everyone was vitamin D deficient, so it was part of my sort of evangelism. Is there a risk that taking multiple vitamin supplements where some vitamins have doses in both, or does the body regulate and remove what it doesn't need more of? So, and yeah, water-soluble vitamins you will get rid of. Fat-soluble ones, which are vitamin A, D, E, and K, are absorbed differently, so that your body doesn't store things like vitamin D, which is why it's so important to take regularly. I think the answer, the question there is really, can you overdose on vitamins? In theory you can, and there are some vitamins you've got to be very careful with. So B12, I want to just a quick word on this actually. So the big, I won't name any names in terms of makes, but the ones that you buy over the counter that just say contains B12 contains cyanocobalamin, which is sort of an artificial type of B12 and doesn't suit everyone. In fact, it can actually make people feel anxious. So the best type of B12 is called hydroxocobalamin, which is suitable for everyone. But that's just a quick point there. But yeah, supplements are very individual depending on your need. One of the things I would say for me, and the reason I take omega-3, is many years ago I did a DNA analysis, and I'm missing a gene that absorbs omega-3, so I need more than most people. So I eat lots more fish and all that sort of stuff. Right, I seem to constantly get colds every few months or so. What would be your best advice for mitigating this, really? Yeah, or to mitigate that, it's such a common question, this. Firstly, I would want to know if you are taking vitamin D in winter months. Secondly, sometimes, if you've got, we've got a local friend who is a paediatrician, and one of their children constantly had a runny nose, and I think they just ignored it. But actually, when they swabbed the nose, it had grown something called Haemophilus influenzae, which actually is a bacteria that needs treating with an antibiotic. So it's worth sort of just checking there isn't anything like that. And other things, just in terms of if you get the basics right, I'd like to know more about your typical day, really. Are you getting enough sleep? Have you got a vitamin D receptor mutation? What are your vitamin D levels like? Are you having a whole food diet? You're getting enough, minerals like zinc and magnesium, which you can get from things like nuts. So that type of thing. There's no sort of magic answer, I'm afraid. What is the best way to get collagen in your body? I've seen tablets, powders, moisturizers. Yeah, look, there's loads of studies out there, some that say, look, there's no real evidence for collagen supplements. Bone broth actually probably is the most natural way. If you can make that, I've seen it sort of in the supermarkets now. It's hideously expensive to buy. I would say the best way is probably bone broth. Yeah. Can alcohol intake significantly impact joint pain? Yes, absolutely, because it raises your uric acid, and uric acid, when it's very high, will cause gout. So uric acid is a sort of end product of sugar intake. Alcohol really is sugar ultimately, and what happens when you're taking in alcohol either too much, too regularly, or it's hurting your joints, is sometimes the sugar, you get glycated joints, where all your joints ache a little bit. So the answer is yes, it can. What is the best time to take vitamins throughout the day? Morning, generally, unless it's something that you want to relax you. So magnesium, is a mineral that is inhibitory, so it sort of relaxes everything, and so that's probably better taken at night. Right, here's yeah. Let me just have a quick look. So some of these sort of really personal ones that are sort of medical advice, I can't really go into, I don't think, because it was interesting about the example with the guy with high stress levels and raised blood sugars. Oh, that one's gone. Sorry, where's that now? I can't see it. It was interesting about the example with the guy with high stress levels and raised blood sugars. I've experienced this following a bereavement, and my doctor thought my raised cortisol levels had caused a raise in mine, resulting being put on Manjaro. I feel better, but get bad bloating after small meals. How can I look after my gut flora? Yeah, that's a really difficult one and quite specific. Sorry, I probably can't go into that, but those drugs often have side effects, like they can have, like diarrhea. So again, it's fibrous whole foods really for gut flora. Let's have a look. Sorry, where are we? Sorry, I'm just trying to find some other more suitable ones. Is it better to have IM or IV drips rather than taking oral supplements? I guess if you're into that sort of thing, yes, because they get absorbed more quickly. But again, depends why you're taking them. Not always essential. I've been vegetarian for over 10 years, and due to my diet, should I have extra vitamins to make up? Really good question. So one of the things I'm trying to get across is that health is completely individual. Some people do really, really well on a vegetarian or even a vegan diet, and other people do really well on, a meat-heavy diet. And one of the things, it very much depends on your constitution. So if you are a type A person with, lots of, lots of high stress, and you're eating lots of red meat, that will just put up your sympathetic nervous system drive, and you'll feel more stressed. And that person does better on a vegetarian diet. Whereas if you're someone who's quite sluggish and need a bit of speeding up, for want of a, you know, kind of a better phrase, you probably do better on a meat-heavy diet. So the answer is sometimes you need extra support, and B12 is often slightly low in people who are vegetarian, but not always by any means. So, so I think time is coming to a close. I'm just going to sort of wrap up. So I hope that was useful. I mean, even if you take one thing away, I will have done my job, because I know there's health and well-being is so confusing these days. It confuses me. Sometimes I read something or I see something on social media and I think, gosh, I didn't know that. But if you can just focus, just get rid of the noise and focus on yourself and what you're doing, what you can do. Comparisons are not healthy either. Don't worry if your neighbor or your best friend is doing X, Y, and Z. It might work really well for them. What works for you is what you've got to work out. And you'll know, this is what I mean about tailoring things like exercise and diet. If you eat something and you feel terrible an hour later, it's probably not great for you, because you're getting a partial sort of inflammatory kind of response. I get this very sadly with eggs. I feel totally spaced out. My joints ache and stuff, so I can't eat them anymore. It doesn't mean I'm allergic to them. I just know that's not the right fuel for me. And remember, feel, flow, fuel. How you feel about yourself, how you move, and what you are taking to sort of nourish yourself. I think I'm going to leave it there. So listen, thank you so much for having me. It's been really enjoyable. Sorry if it was a bit higgledy-piggledy, but but there was so much to get across, and just try and incorporate some of it into your daily life. When you go through today, maybe think about your typical day and just like one thing that you can do that might just nudge you towards, as I said, feeling better in the moment, which I do from alternate nostril breathing, and also making sure that you live a longer, healthier, and sort of happier life, really. So and do enjoy the rest of it. there's such an amazing list of speakers that you've got content to last you a lifetime, really. So thanks again, and yeah, I look forward to coming back at some point if you'll have me.